James wheeled up to his front door and slammed into a wall of freshly poured concrete blocking his only ramp. His independence crushed beneath a neighbor's ruthless order. The air crackled with silent rage and desperate hope. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. First, James Miller sat rigidly in his wheelchair at the edge of his driveway, staring at the unyielding slab of fresh asphalt that now blocked the only path leading up to his front door. The handicap ramp he had painstakingly designed and installed after his accident, a symbol of resilience, a lifeline to his independence, was now rendered useless, swallowed beneath the weight of Karen Whitman's repaved driveway. The black, glossy expanse gleamed in the afternoon sun, an impenetrable barrier crafted not by necessity, but by spite. Each line of that asphalt felt like a deliberate stroke in a silent war waged against him. This wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a calculated assault on everything James stood for. A veteran who had served with honor, he was no stranger to battles, but the fight to reclaim his autonomy in what was supposed to be a peaceful sanctuary was a new kind of warfare, one that pried open wounds far deeper than any combat injury. Karen's actions stripped him of something sacred, the simple dignity of walking, or rolling, unhindered into his own home. The neighborhood around him buzzed with murmurs and thinly veiled glances. Some residents had already taken sides, their loyalties fractured along invisible lines drawn by fear, conformity, or quiet rebellion. Karen's clique, those who reveled in the tight grip of HOA rules and their enforced uniformity, nodded approvingly at the neat driveway's stark symmetry. Others, more discreet and empathetic, felt the chill of injustice creeping through the cul-de-sac's manicured lawns. But no one dared confront Karen openly. Her reputation for ruthlessness was well earned. James's attempts to reason with her had been met with an icy wall of condescension. "You must understand, James," Karen had said with a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "The HOA has standards to uphold. That ramp is a mess, unsightly, out of place, and frankly, a violation of community aesthetics." Her voice dripped with the sort of faux civility that masked a calculated, unyielding will. Behind her carefully scripted words lay an unmistakable message: comply or face consequences. Fines, threats, legal jargon tossed like weapons. Karen wielded the HOA's bylaws like a sword, not as guidelines for coexistence, but as instruments of control. James had pored over every page, looking for any loophole, any recourse to defend what was rightfully his. But the HOA meetings had a predictably one-sided script. Karen's position as board president insulated her from accountability, and the other members, either intimidated or complicit, sat silently, eyes fixed downward. The ramp itself was more than a structure. It was a testament to James's struggle to reclaim a life fractured by tragedy. The polished handrails gleamed faintly, and the gentle incline was a bridge between confinement and freedom. Each bolt secured in place was a small victory, a step toward normalcy. Now, obscured and blocked by Karen's freshly laid driveway, it felt like a betrayal, a brutal reminder that even in a community built on mutual respect, cruelty could thrive beneath the surface. James clenched his fists, the raw skin of his palms pressing against the worn leather gloves he wore to steady his grip on the wheelchair. His mind raced, not with despair, but with a fierce, burning resolve. This blockade was not merely a physical obstruction. It was a challenge, a provocation designed to break his spirit. But he would not yield. The ramp, his home, his dignity, all of it demanded a fight. He replayed the conversations in his head, the cold, rehearsed tones of Karen and her board, the dismissive refusals to hear him out. Their indifference was a slap in the face, an echo of a deeper prejudice masked by bureaucratic language. James understood the subtext all too well. His disability was inconvenient, his presence disruptive to the sanitized vision Karen sought to enforce. The very tools he used to navigate his world were branded as undesirable, a blot on the pristine canvas she wished to preserve. Behind closed doors, Whispers had begun to circulate, sympathies exchanged in hushed tones, silent questions about the fairness of the HOA's actions. Yet, public support remained elusive. Fear of retribution or ostracism kept most neighbors at arm's length. Only a few dared meet James's gaze with a flicker of understanding, their eyes reflecting the quiet outrage simmering beneath the surface of the neighborhood's polished facade. In this charged atmosphere, James felt the full weight of isolation. The ramp blockade was not just a physical barrier, but a metaphor for the invisible walls erected by prejudice, power, and control. It ignited something fierce within him, a raw, unyielding fire fueled by years of hardship and sacrifice. As the sun dipped lower behind the row of identical houses, casting long shadows over the asphalt, James resolved that this was only the beginning. The fight to reclaim his home, his freedom, and his respect was far from over. Days bled relentlessly into one another, each marked by the silent erosion of James Miller's autonomy, a slow unraveling that gnawed at the edges of his spirit. His mornings began with the familiar ache of frustration, the raw sting of humiliation, layering over his physical pain. The once simple act of entering his own home now demanded orchestrated efforts, friends and family summoned to maneuver his wheelchair around the blocked entrance, negotiating the narrow margins between cars and shrubbery. Every visit became a stark reminder of the freedom denied him, the ramp he had built with hope and pride, now a ghost beneath the shadow of Karen Whitman's newly laid asphalt. The weight of dependency pressed down like a suffocating shroud. James was a man who had once been defined by strength, on the battlefield and in life's ordinary battles alike. Yet now, even his body betrayed him, forcing reliance on others for what should have been the most basic of rights, safe access to his own home. The loss was not just physical, it was a profound assault on identity, on dignity. Each day, as he waited for a helping hand to come, the bitterness deepened. The ramp blockade was more than a barrier. It was an emblem of isolation, a wedge driven deep between James and the community he sought to belong to. Yet amid this darkness flickered a fragile flame of hope. Sarah, his wife, became his steadfast anchor, a constant presence whose unwavering support lent him strength when his own resolve faltered. She refused to let the silence and exclusion swallow them whole. Together they embarked on a meticulous campaign to document every injustice. Sarah wielded her camera like a weapon, capturing the stark contrast between the ramp's clean, accessible design and the obtrusive black asphalt that suffocated it. Photographs lined their kitchen table alongside HOA notices, littered with veiled threats, letters from city departments, and printouts of disability access laws, their edges worn from constant handling. This careful record-keeping was no mere act of defiance. It was a lifeline thrown across the chasm of bureaucracy, a plea for justice grounded in undeniable facts. Sarah's determination was infectious. She reached beyond their immediate circle, calling disability rights advocates, speaking with legal advisors versed in the nuances of municipal codes. Their fight began to take shape beyond the personal, crystallizing into a broader struggle against a system that prioritized conformity over compassion, rules over rights. Word of James's ordeal spread quietly through the neighborhood's tightly controlled channels. For some residents, long resigned to the iron grip of Karen Whitman's HOA regime, his courage sparked a flicker of recognition. A shared experience of marginalization whispered behind closed doors. They saw in James's struggle a reflection of their own frustrations, masked beneath the surface of perfect lawns and uniform mailboxes. This nascent solidarity, though tentative, offered a glimmer of collective power. Then came the turning point, the city inspector's arrival. The man's measured steps on James's property carried the weight of authority and possibility. With clipboard in hand, he scrutinized the ramp, its gentle slope, and handrails, nodding in quiet approval. His report was unequivocal. The ramp met every standard dictated by accessibility laws. In stark contrast, Karen's extension of her driveway was deemed an illegal obstruction. an overreach that contravened municipal regulations and violated James's right to reasonable access. The inspector's order was clear and direct. The obstruction had to be removed immediately. But Karen's response was anything but compliant. Her refusal was rooted in an unyielding sense of entitlement, a fortress built on fear, control, and a toxic vision of perfection that brooked no dissent. She rejected the city's mandate, her defiance a rallying cry to those who feared change and loss of power. Tensions within the neighborhood escalated rapidly, transforming once polite interactions into battlegrounds of resentment and confrontation. HOA meetings became charged arenas where voices rose above reason, fueled by anger and fear. Accusations flew like daggers. James was branded a troublemaker, a disruptor of peace. Karen portrayed as a vigilant guardian of order. The community fractured along invisible fault lines, neighbors taking sides or retreating into wary silence. James found himself at the epicenter of a conflict far greater than a single ramp or driveway. His struggle illuminated the broader dynamics of control and resistance within the tightly controlled ecosystem of HOA governance. The fight was no longer just about accessibility. It was about who had the power to define belonging, to enforce conformity, and to silence dissent. Yet beneath the cacophony, beneath the bitterness and barricades, a quiet resilience endured. James and Sarah clung to hope, not the naive hope of swift resolution, but the tempered hope born of steadfast commitment to justice. Each photograph, each letter, each conversation was a brick in the foundation of their resistance. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with confrontation and sacrifice, but it was theirs to claim. In the face of obstruction and exclusion, hope flickered, not as a fragile spark, but as a burgeoning flame, promising that the fight for dignity and belonging was far from over. The crescendo of the struggle unfolded with an unyielding force as the city government stepped decisively into the fray. After relentless advocacy from James, Sarah, and their growing circle of supporters, the city's Building and Safety Department escalated the matter from a mere code violation to a formal enforcement action. A stern order was issued. Karen Whitman's extended driveway was to be shut down immediately, sealed off until she complied with the mandate to remove the obstruction blocking James's ramp. The weight of the order was unmistakable, backed not only by law, but by the undeniable moral clarity that the community's collective conscience was beginning to embrace. This city intervention galvanized public support, transforming James's quiet personal battle into a rallying cry for justice and inclusivity. Local news outlets, previously hesitant, seized upon the story, casting a spotlight on the stark inequities imposed by the HOA's leadership. Reporters interviewed neighbors who expressed a mixture of regret and resolve. Regret for allowing the oppression to fester unnoticed, resolve to never let such cruelty take root again. The narrative shifted away from property lines and aesthetics to the fundamental human right of access and dignity. Images of James navigating the narrow path restored to him were broadcast widely, symbols of triumph over systemic exclusion. Under the glare of public scrutiny and the weight of legal consequences, Karen's facade of control began to crack. Her final act of defiance, a passive-aggressive sign emblazoned with thinly veiled insults toward rule followers and troublemakers, only served to deepen her isolation. The sign, intended as a weapon, became a monument to her stubbornness, alienating her further from neighbors who had begun to see through her rigid dogma. The community's sympathies had clearly aligned with James and his right to live freely in his own home. With Karen's reluctant compliance, the ramp, once a symbol of his marginalization, was restored to its rightful purpose. But the victory was far more profound than the physical space reclaimed. The very structure of the HOA itself trembled under the weight of this upheaval. At the next annual meeting, members who had supported Karen's exclusionary policies found themselves unseated by a wave of new leaders committed to empathy, inclusivity, and respect for every resident's rights. These new board members emerged from the ranks of neighbors who had witnessed the toll of oppression and were determined to rebuild a community founded on dignity rather than control. James's triumph resonated as a testament not only to perseverance but to the possibility of transformation in places hardened by rigidity and fear. His battle was a reminder that justice need not be an abstract ideal but a living, breathing force, capable of toppling entrenched power structures and fostering real, meaningful change. The ripple effects extended beyond the immediate neighborhood. James's story inspired conversations in city halls, community forums, and advocacy groups about the necessity of vigilance and courage in protecting vulnerable populations. Neighbors who once kept silent now spoke openly about the importance of accessibility and kindness. Grassroots initiatives sprang forth, aimed at promoting inclusivity, from sidewalk improvements and communal support networks to educational programs about disability rights. The toxic atmosphere that had once suffocated the neighborhood gave way to a tentative but genuine sense of solidarity. Where suspicion and hostility had reigned, trust and cooperation began to take root. In this transformation, James became more than a man fighting for his right to enter his home. He became a symbol of resilience and hope. His unwavering determination and refusal to be silenced echoed in the hearts of others who faced battles obscured by silence and stigma. Stories of his struggle circulated beyond the confines of the suburb, shared by disability advocates and human rights organizations as a beacon of possibility. His journey proved that standing up against injustice, no matter the scale or the obstacles, could restore not only physical access, but also personal dignity and community spirit. It demonstrated that courage, backed by solidarity and the law, could pierce even the most impenetrable walls of prejudice and exclusion. James's victory was a clarion call, an invitation to those marginalized and oppressed to raise their voices, to resist quietly accepted cruelty, and to believe that change is within reach. The neighborhood, once a battleground of bitterness and division, began its slow, deliberate healing. The shadows cast by Karen's blockade receded beneath the light of a new chapter, one where justice was not an afterthought, but the foundation upon which a true community could be built. In the echoes of that victory, the lesson resounded clear. Dignity is not a privilege granted by authority, but a right fought for and claimed by those brave enough to stand their ground.